Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode
Deuces.
of Dungeon Delvers. And tonight we are going to tackle the dungeon of the Fighter Class. Dun dun dun. Listen, just before we get too hard into it, Dungeon Delvers. This is not a linear show. This is not we are going to cover stuff that we want to cover when we want to cover it. So before we get too hard into it, he's Gene,
He's Renny.
and together
We are unconventional heroes.
Sweet guitar.
Yeah. Like,
So thank you everyone for joining us. We kind of talked about our background in our first episode, so if you want to know more about who we are, check us out there. We're gonna just kind of move right along. Big blinking sign in the roadway here. Everything that we say today is our opinion. No one has endorsed this opinion besides ourselves, and even then.
And to bring a good anecdote, our father taught us opinions are like assholes. Everyone has them, and they're usually full of shit. But you're gonna listen to our shit. Pew pew pew. Maybe, hopefully, please.
And hopefully you like our shit. But if not, that's okay too. Disagreeing with us is just as much fun. So yeah, I guess without further ado, Gene.
And also, just remember, audience, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will try to any that we can't cover during the chat, we will try to save for the end, and we will do our best to answer them.
Yeah. So I suppose with some ado, Gene, let's delve into the dungeon of what does it mean to be a fighter in 5th edition. Gene, you know what happens now. It's time for initiative.
All right. Would you like to roll first, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh, yeah, baby.
Fuck. Okay.
Ooh, yeah, baby.
Okay. Listen, I'm gonna get a natural fucking 1. Watch this happen.
I mean, you can't beat a crit, man. You know, I feel like math should say that shouldn't happen, or very much should happen. But the fact that you called it is,
you know
concerning.
What? Sometimes choosing to fail is always a good option.
You know what, Gene? That is an excellent point. Well, I guess then I'll start this thing off. So, right, you know, you've looked at the PHB. Your buddy started a D&D campaign, and you're like, so fighters look cool, they sound cool. Why would I be a fighter? And you know, the question it's a hard one to answer, or you know, it has a lot of answers, but I think the best place to start is inspirations that you might get from movies, comic books, television shows, books, you know, any place that you have seen these sort of action, big quotes here, big action hero kind of people, you know, raise their weapon and strike down their foes or protect their friends with a shield of red, white, and blue. You know, anytime that you've seen that and been like, that was cool, how do I do that? Or how can I emulate that in another way? The fighter class is definitely for you.
I mean, you did forget a masterful dwarf who picked up a piece of oaken wood.
That's true.
Did also use a sweet ass shield.
Right. And again, there are literally thousands upon thousands of examples of one man, one woman standing up against a bulwark of enemies and standing tall against insurmountable odds. And if that sort of imagery speaks to you, you're gonna have a good time being a fighter. Gene, why don't you talk a little bit more about why this class is kind of cool?
I think being a fighter really kind of comes down to one or two things, and that is arms and armaments. It is what you physically wear, and what you carry and what you're known for. So whether it is, your hand and a half sword, your short sword, your scimitar, your bow and arrows, or is it your gleaming plate mail or your studded leather because you're a bit of a scout or an archer. I think or a fancy ass shield which can be paired with a longsword. But it could also just be a shield, or it could be your hands. Any form of martial combat generally goes around what you specialize with arms and what you specialize in your armament. And that kind of makes the fighter, with their unique ability to really get more bang for their buck depending on what they specialize
Yeah, it really
with.
sets them apart.
Absolutely.
Um, and this is a group game, right? If you're playing D&D, we're gonna hope that you're playing it with a group of people and not just the voices in your head. But again, no judgments. If that's how you get down, that's cool. But the cool thing about Fighter is that it very much has a key role in your group. You know, your fighter, whether you are this sort of fighter who gets these sort of gets advantage from like high perches and takes these amazingly accurate shots, or you stand in front of 10 orc warriors and hold your shield high, or you have a sword the size of you and you just cleave through your enemies. No matter what facet or angle you choose to be as a fighter, you are going to have a very specific role in combat and in your group in general. When they're like, oh man, all those orcs are coming, everyone's going to look at you to see how you sort of handle it depending on, again, your choices. But when it comes to certain areas of the game, you are going to kind of get to dictate the flow and dictate the rules of engagement, so to speak. And that can be a lot of fun for an action hero type person. Um,
I would say kind of jumping with that is you you are also kind of like the master of physical challenges in the environment,
oh,
whether
big time.
hurdling a small gap or leaping tree to tree or climbing something, swimming, any
Swinging from a chandelier.
yeah, any of the things that likely rely on your physical traits. Being a fighter, you're pretty good at them, and so you might be able to play with that aspect by considering actions that might be a little bit more difficult. If your DM sets an athletics check at like a 15 or a 20, you might be a little bit more reliably able to hit those numbers to overcome difficulties that your wizard might not be able to, or your other party members aren't. Or you could even have some of those really heroic moments where it's like dragging your own party member away from danger, where your DM might ask you for like, oh, how strong are you? Well, you're probably pretty strong if you're a physical fighter or a melee fighter, so it's not going to be that hard for you to be able to pull these things off. Or if you want to get those awesome moments where, like, you're fighting on a fucking stone bridge and you're like, I shoved that dude to his death 1,000 feet. Well, that guy's going to try to resist you, and hopefully and likely in your odds, you'll probably have a favorable result.
Yeah, the fighter definitely has the edge on 300ing someone into the abyss. Um, and kind of speaking off of some of the things that my brother here was talking about, is that you get to be a really reliable asset on your team. And listen, not that any class is unreliable, maybe wild sorcerers being the exception. Um, but when it comes to sort of what you do, whether it's I'm going to kind of roll this together with the kind of style that you choose to play. There's a lot of different examples of fighters, like Driz Doradin. While he's definitely iconically a ranger, there is a fighting style, there is a physical representation of him and how he fights in the world and how he approaches his enemies. And again, your teammates are going to kind of look to you, and it doesn't mean you need to be a tactician or a leader, but like if everyone's sort of, you have that moment of like, enemies are coming, you're here, what do you do? If your fighter goes running out into the woods, banging their shield, okay, he's going to draw fire, so someone else can, and it makes you a very kind of key figure in sort of how your group dynamics play. And in our first episode, we talked about group dynamics in a big way, and fighters are definitely kind of a pillar of that group dynamic. And again, other roles, other classes can fill that role, but fighter does it really well. This is why this class has been around since the inception of D&D.
And I also think that it's a very easy class to kind of get into for your style of play. If you don't want to worry about the complications of having a gajillion spells that you get to choose every day and change them, or the manipulation of spell slots, or the complications of making deals with a demon, it's
Always a good choice.
it's okay to be a person who hits things with a weapon, and there's nothing wrong with it, and no one's going to be mad at that. And so I think it really depends on your style of play. And as a fighter, you get a lot of bang for your buck, which is you can fight with whatever weapon you choose, and even if you specialize in a certain weapon, you're still almost equally as good with every other weapon because you are skilled in all weapons and armor. And so I find that when I had a friend who was like, I've never played D&D before, but I want to do this for my friend's birthday, and so help me make a character. And then for her, I was like, what do you like to do? And we've LARPed together, and she likes hitting people with plumbing equipment. And so she was like, I want to hit things. And I was like, well, your character in LARP fights the sword and board. Do you want to do a sword and shield? She's like, sounds great. And so I helped her build a very basic fighter, sword and shield, and she understood it perfectly. Well, especially with the simple mechanics of D&D of 5th edition. But she understood the concept of like, I want to be a badass warrior, and she was.
Yeah, it's very accessible, and I think Gene, you kind of nailed it there. And kind of the last thing we're going to talk about before we sort of go further in this dungeon is sometimes it's fun. Gene made his friend someone who hits people with a sword and a shield. And listen, depending on your game, depending on the world setting you're in, depending on the homebrew world setting you're in, fantasy has dragons, fireballs, lightning bolts, people who can spring forth magic at a whim. And sometimes there's an interesting story to tell about being a somewhat normal person in an abnormal world. And we see that all the time in media. I think very much of like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Sokka was surrounded by people who could control the elements with thought and movement, and he was a guy with a boomerang and
An
eventually a
iconic
sword,
boomerang.
an iconic boomerang. But like his story was just as interesting as the other crazy powerful people. So there is something to be said about, and it also gives you as a player and as a character, you get to kind of inject a different perspective to your group. Because your wizard might be thinking about the implications of the lich taking over the weave, and you're like, listen, do we got to bust it down the door and kick in his face? All right, like you can sometimes ground your party when things get a little wild and wacky.
I thought of a good iconic fighter, Antonio Banderas' character from the 13th Warrior.
Oh, great. Oh, totally.
As he kind of learned their weapon style and picked it up and made it his own, and it's like, he's just a normal guy, but he's there, and he's a great warrior. All right, so let us move on to the next room where I will definitely not win initiative.
Gene, that might be the curse. That might be your curse of this show. Is that I beat your ass.
Well, I'm gonna go first because maybe I can steal your luck. So I'm gonna roll for initiative to see who starts talking. 16.
Ooh. All right. Let's see how I do.
You gotta wait 5 seconds.
I thought you fixed it.
I did. Oh, that I specifically didn't fix.
Specifically that.
I said I was going
All
to,
right.
and then I definitely didn't do it. Now you should be fine.
Can I beat a 16 and show Gene he's a punk?
Jesus, fuck
can.
you.
With
It's
pizzazz
fine.
and style.
I'll just crit you when I roll D&D.
Yeah, Gene will just take it out on me when he's my GM. It's fine, guys. Don't worry about it. All right. So we talked about some of the inspirations and why is the fighter class appealing? There's a lot of iconic imagery. There's a lot of how you interact with your group. There's a lot of different things. But you're going to take it a step further. Cool. You've chosen to be a fighter. Awesome. You've made a cool choice. But what does it mean to be a fighter? And a little bit mechanically, sort of when taking story elements and game mechanics and sort of raising those things together, right? What does it mean? And it kind of starts out with, when you're a first level fighter, when you're first starting out, you kind of are choosing your fighting style. You're sort of making your mark on the world. Are you a fencer? Do you fight with grace and acrobatics? Are you someone who picks up a heavy hammer and tries to smash your enemies to pieces? Do you like I was saying earlier, do you find a nice little perch and take shots at your enemies, putting arrows in them before they can harm your allies? And your style not only mechanically has benefits, which are listed very, very gracefully through the PHB and other resources, but something to think about is your fighting style is your mark on the world. It's sort of you are going to bring all your training, all your prowess, and maybe when you describe your actions, your fighting style is going to have an impact on that. And there's other fighter features that are also going to kind of be iconic. Gene, you want to talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, going a little bit on the fighter styles, like you're saying, they're so cool. There's so many. And, like, some are not even involving you hitting someone. Some are like your senses are so honed that within 10 feet of you, you can notice people around you because you get, like, a blind sense. It's like, so you can play, like, Daredevil if you wanted. And, like, so just these specializations, while they involve fighting, they are also so varied that your uniqueness. So the other big thing I think that really draws the fighter is they're kind of like that everyman, that peerless person, and with that they kind of get this like second wind where they can they get hit real hard, but if it didn't kill them, they kind of brush off the dirt, and you know what? Maybe they weren't as injured as they looked, and it's called second wind. And it's a really neat ability because it doesn't take their action. It lets them, still get off their attacks or do something really cool. And then kind of at the end of their turn or the beginning, they shrug off that punch and they get back up. And if you're looking
Nobody
in
makes me bleed my own
blood and nobody. Yeah, and so if you're looking in movies like Captain America before he takes the super soldier serum, when he's like, I can take this all day, and gets back up. Or if you've seen Daredevil, like Marvel Daredevil, he gets his ass fucking kicked, but he always gets back up. And it's kind of that story moment when the cards are down, the hero's has that last bit of strength that he doesn't know, that reserve. That's his second wind, where he gets that moment that kind of pauses time around him, takes a breath, gets back up. He's probably not perfectly healthy, but he can go another round or two.
Right.
And yeah, so that's kind of just part of it. And I think the next part is really cool, but I'm gonna give it to you, Renny.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that is grit and determination, and as a fighter, kind of some of the story aspects of your motivations for your character, of how did you get to where you are, the decisions you made in your life. Your class is telling you a little bit of there's some people who run from the fight. There's some people who try to outthink the problem. You're a fighter. You fight. whatever. If it's injustice, you fought injustice. Whether it's an invading army, you fought them. Whether it was a band of gnolls, attacking your village, you stood up. And again, it's just one of those, like, think about those things as a fighter when you're faced with, like, how do we tackle this? And listen, you can be the thinking man's fighter about tactics. You can be, but part of who you are is you take on evil, injustice, ideologies that are not in line with your own. Is you kind of battle against them. And again, so Gene talked about one of the core mechanics of Fighter, which is Second Wind, and I kind of want to touch on Action Surge because, like, listen, we see this all the time. The music kind of pauses during the fight scene, and you get a flashback sequence of, like, that character's parents being like, I'll always be proud of you," and then they flash back into the fight, and with, like, a grit of their teeth, they take another swing and they knock the and the idea with Action Surge is, well, yes, mechanically it's take another action, and that can be huge for a fighter because one of your claims to fame is that you're going to get more attacks than any other class. um but it's also one of those things that you can use Action Surge not just to attack. I mean, it's an action. You can do anything with it. You can move. You can, like Gene was saying, pull your friend out of the fire, pull your friend away from danger. And I can't tell you how many times some of the fighters that I've played that I've used my Action Surge to just be helpful, or try to get a potion down my ally's throat when they're down, stuff like that. But Action Surge is beautiful because it gives you hero moments, right? And if you've chosen to be a fighter, I'm not saying you're looking for glory and you're looking for hero moments, but probably a lot of the iconography and the sort of inspirations that brought you here was like, it's when Captain America straps his shield to his arm, even though he's beaten and bloodied, and he keeps fighting. It's a hero moment, when Thor and Oakenshield, has nothing in his hands but a tree bark to fight off this orc marauder. It's a hero moment, right? These moments make stories, not just the stories in game, but, like, these are stories that you can kind of that you'll be able to take away from your tables as well. And so Action Surge is one of those great, sort of, not just mechanically powerful, but is a great opportunity for story moments and stuff like that. Yeah, Gene. So why don't you talk about sort of the grit and determination when it comes to being an
Yeah.
indomitable warrior?
Yeah, and that kind of brings us on to like one of their next core features. They don't get till about mid level, about ninth, but it is awesome. It's that moment where, you know what, you failed that save, you're fucked, you're done. Everyone is like, oh shit, we need him. You get to call that moment, and that a moment you determine. Maybe a second chance will give you it. Maybe you rolled like shit. You just rolled crap. But in it's your grit. And the kind of role play behind it is it's called Indomitable, where it's just like it's kind of that moment where you're Wyatt Earp in the middle of the creek and you go, no, as your mustache grows and bullets fly around you, and you can just and you're indomitable. So it's any kind of thing that could be a saving throw or harmful effect or something possessing your mind. You can get a second chance. Now you can only do that once every short rest or so, but you get more as you get more powerful, and depending on what you do as a subclass, you can do cooler things with it. But the whole point of it is your character's grit. It's their determination. It's just, or their sheer athleticism, which just whatever choice and role play choice you give it to make it that they get this reroll. Well, why? How? And it's because they got a little bit more fight in them than everyone else. They got a little bit extra ounce to dig just that much deeper than your average person, which
Yeah.
goes likely, where they have a little bit more extra than their average person, into our next topic beautifully.
Yeah, Gene, I'm gonna rapid fire a few of these
Mm-hmm.
points just because again we're not digging deep into mechanics, guys. We're kind of glossing because you know a lot of and again we discussed this a lot in episode one, but just it's a lot about how story can inform mechanics and vice versa, right? And like one of the great things about a fighter is you get extra attacks. You just you are a
So
person who
fucking
is
many.
so many attacks, but you're a product of training of and again your story can be you grew up on the streets and you had to fight to survive. You were a military person and you had rigorous training. You're part of a knightly order. There's a million ways you can be a fighter, but you get all these extra attacks because like listen, wizards read books because they're nerds. uh, Sorcerers just kind of wake up and fart out magic. You worked for it, right? And what's your payoff? Extra fucking attacks. um, and the nice thing that goes with extra attacks is you're probably going to be in the shit a lot, and being in the shit, fighting multiple people. The nice thing about being a fighter is you probably are kind of have a higher AC. So, in a lot of physical confrontations, you're going to excel. You're going to be hitting a lot, hopefully. Um, and you're going to have an AC to kind of back up, back it up to be like, I can withstand the onslaught, right? Um, Gene, you wanna
Yeah,
keep talking about this
yeah.
class?
Now, besides getting extra attacks and having a higher armor class, which for those who don't know what D&D is, uh, it's their ability to be hit. Um, they get things called ASIs and feats, and for simplicity's sake, they can raise their stats, their physical, mental stats, or they can get small perks that add to themselves, which, if your DM allows you, feats, which can also really hyper customize your character, or on the other side of that spectrum, make them hyper versatile because you can fill in all those gaps that maybe you're like, man, I'm a fighter, so I might not be this kind of guy. Well, you took a feat that gave you those languages or those skills or a little bit of magic. And so you can take minor adjustments through this and you get the most. You get a ton comparatively. While most classes get 4, I think you get like 8 or something close to that. I'm not
Yeah,
exact numbers.
yeah.
And then I think and that's really neat. But I think where DJ Poser was mentioning that he digs the protection specialization. I made a protection fighter, and they're awesome, and that kind of goes well into the combat role. Fighters have a lot of different roles they can play depending on how you build your fighter. So, Thaco, gross. We'll get into that. So for combat, I hate you for even doing that. How dare you? Uh, but so you can tank, which is kind of like taking the threat on you, and you tank by getting in the middle of the fight, taking the attacks, and generally with a higher armor class or tricks, you know,
And higher hit points.
and higher hit points, you can mitigate, you can take damage. You might also just take attacks that miss you, or you can do that. You can kind of do a trade off between these options where it's like high in tank, or you can dip a little bit into tanking. You can do heavy damage where you focus on big weapons, extremely specialized range combat. And so this high damage is you sacrifice probably some armor class because you're generally not you're wearing heavy armor, but you don't have a shield. You're, hitting harder because you have a bigger weapon, but you might not have as much range. Or you might have only range and not as much of a big weapon.
Right. There's a cost in.
Yeah, and then it goes into range, which has its own specializations in its own subcategories. You're never really going to tank with ranged because you're just not going to... You don't want to draw aggro. You don't want to draw people's attacks because you want to be at a distance. And then you also have a fighter style, which is kind of skirmishing, where you're running in and out or getting to where you need to be each round, kind of determining that. And so you have these few, and there's also besides tanking, there's also a little bit more specialized in tanking where you can do like defense options, where you can defend for other people by making it disadvantageous for your opponent to attack anyone but you.
Yeah.
And because you have a high armor class, that really doesn't really, and hit points, that's not as bad for you. You want to go to the next one, or do you want to talk about Thaco?
I mean, I can talk about Thaco. Are we talking about Thaco?
Well, DJ Poser was thinking that they should bring it back, and I think
Oh my
he's
God.
he.
Tell him to go to bed because he's an old man. But listen, Thaco went the way of the dodo, and I think it's probably best that it did.
Uh, can you tell everyone what that means?
You know what, Gene? I will break it down this one time so that we all know what it is. So Thaco is a function in second edition that stands for, it's an acronym, it stands for two hit armor class 0. And the idea in second edition, I mean, I don't know what maniac thought this up, was that your to hit is a sliding scale, right? And in the middle of that sliding scale is 0. And depending on your THACO score, whatever that number is, let's say for instance, it's a 15, and I can't believe that it's 2021 and I'm talking about this.
Oh, it's great. I love
But
it.
let's say your THACO score is a 15. If on a die roll, with all your bonuses, with everything you factor, you hit a 15, you have hit armor class 0. Now, every number above or below 15 moves that sliding scale positive, and wait for it, negative numbers as well.
We'd also
If
like.
you go above 15, you hit negative armor classes. If you hit below 15, you hit positive armor classes. Because people who made D&D in the 80s and 90s were sadists. And
Oh yeah, and everyone's armor class clearly started at 10 because that made sense that you were hitting armor class 0.
right. And thankfully, we don't use this
Yeah,
backwards system anymore.
yeah. Luckily, D&D has transitioned over through pretty much third, fourth, and fifth to just simple edition,
Yeah.
and I think that was a bold move, but very good.
Thank God we're never talking about that again.
But
Moving on.
history lessons.
The more you wish you didn't know, I don't know. But right, so beyond combat roles, and again, the nice thing about fighter is no matter what you maybe specialize towards, you can probably perform the tasks of another one. You may not be great at it, you may not be, particularly skilled at it, but that's the nice thing about fighter is that there's a lot of versatility there. No matter what feats and stats and subclasses you take, you can always kind of, if it is a physical challenge, you can probably do it. Maybe you're not the best at it, but you can probably do it. And kind of speaking, we sort of looked at it from a combat perspective. And again, a lot of the rules and a lot of what you're going to see in a lot of your books are all about how you interact with combat because, shocker, Dungeons and Dragons is a game about fighting monsters. Um, but there's also out of combat roles, which are important. And, listen, we're going to talk about this a little later, but being a fighter means out of combat, you don't always have a lot to do. That's not to say that you don't. You are certainly still, you have plenty of skills you can rely on, possibly some tool trainings, depending on your background and feat choices. But something that I like to keep in mind is that remember, you are a product of training, you are a product of physical honing, right? So when you approach out of combat problems, don't think about it like the wizard of like, well, I'll cast the fly spell and fly over the wall, or the cleric of like, I will pray to, storm Jesus and he will cast a lightning bolt and remove the wall. You're a fighter. You're like, just climb the fucking wall. That's just what you don't need to think about it and ask a question and do incantations. You just do it, right? You are a person of action. Um, and so kind of keeping that physical presence and physical like how you interact with your environment in a physical sense, is kind of the one of the better ways that you can still stand out of combat without just being like, I do a sword, or I do a big sword, or I, you know. Um, so yeah, that's gonna be kind of what it means to be a fighter. And now we're gonna go an even deeper delve. And this one's a little crunchier because I know we said we're not really focusing on rules, and we're not, but we're gonna get a little crunchier with some of the subclasses and stuff. But I think it's time for me to beat Gene's
It's
ass.
everyone's favorite time for us to roll initiative and watch Rennie somehow roll better on a random dice generator.
Which is I just want everyone to know how this is not the case.
Go. Why don't you go first to see what I have to beat? Oh, great.
Ooh, yeah, it feels good.
Only a
Yeah, it feels
fucking
real good.
only a fucking 17.
That feels good. I like that.
Good.
Yeah, that's
Good.
right.
Just
That looks right.
keeping it real. Yep. You know, I wanted to go second, so that works out for everyone involved.
Yeah, no, good, Gene. Oh, I think that's 3 in a row again, right? I think that's one, two, three.
Well, I mean, I technically won when I called that natural one, so
Yeah, you know what? I'll give you that one. Right. So we talked about what it means to be a fighter. You've chosen to be a fighter. You know, you have some core mechanics that are really cool. You've thought about your environment. Now you hit 3rd level. You have some stories in your bank. You've defeated a few monsters. Now, what what subclass do you take? What way does your fighter separate him or herself from the pack? Right. And you know, we're going to kind of start with you always want to tell a story with your choices, right? And now listen, some people, you know, they play a fighter from level 1 and they have mapped out every level, every feat, every ability score they're going to take from here to level 20. That's how some people play. Some people play that, you know, they're going to kind of let the character develop as the story unfolds, as their relationships change or grow or whatever. And all of these ways are entirely viable. um, but when you take a subclass and you kind of specialize, thinking about how you got to that point, right? um, you know, and for some subclasses, if you are, let's say, a champion, you go champion, kind of a very vanilla fighter. You don't maybe need a lot of story reasons, but it's still good to think about, like, you know, you are a champion. You know, you are a paragon. You know, you are a fighting exemplar. And I'm not saying like what does the ego of that mean. It's just think about that when you meet other fighters and they're good at sword and they're good at this, you are a step beyond them. And you know, each subclass tells a story with the abilities it gives you, with the some of the flavor of the background of how that subclass came to be. And just think about how that subclass shapes your character. And I guess, Gene, you want to start us off, and we'll just kind of back
yeah.
and forth this.
So I'm going to start in alphabetical order with the Arcane Archer. It's flavored to be an elven dabbling of magic with archery, but bah, you don't need that. You essentially get all of these powers based on magical influence, where you sculpt these runes or interweave ancient power into your bow or arrows, and you get this special thing called an arcane shot, and that kind of empowers everything you go with. And you also get a cool minor cantrip to kind of help flavor which side of the spectrum. Are you like druidic or are you mage kind of based?
Arcane, yeah.
Yeah, because you get prestidigitation or druidcraft, which is dope. And if you want to like take and so they're, but they have a lot of cool stories because their special shots are all themed in the different schools of magic. Now they only have, I think, I don't know, it was like 7 or so, or maybe 10. I don't know how many schools of magic there were, but they only have that many special arrows. But they're all so deeply flavored and can do a little bit strange effects that can truly, I think, help, you know, help your your character's versatility and make your range combat feel a little bit more potent. And if we want to go for some like story ideas, like if you were playing, let's say you were playing D&D and you were going to be doing it, let's say in the Marvel universe or a modern world, being Hawkeye with his special like knockout arrows and different cool things, and even Green Arrow, like you could flavor that as the arcane archer subclass. Because in the end, Hawkeye and Green Arrow, they're just normal people, but they got these special arrows that do a cool thing. And honestly, if I were playing that, that's probably what I would do. Robin Hood is a great example of likely some sort of arcane archer if you go with the fantastical side. Legolas, running around using his elven magic to improve himself. And also, if you just want to be that cool archer from the D&D TV show, they're definitely an arcane archer.
Yes,
yeah, you like that reference? Bam, bam, bam.
Yeah, we're talking about Thaco. We're talking about the animated D&D show. Jesus, where did the show go?
It's right where it belongs, in the tubes. All right. But also, and like I said, as I'm not going into too much specifics, I really dig the what shots you choose, because you only get a limit. You don't get to learn all of them. It kind of flavors what you are as an arcane archer. Like, what happens if you sworn off necromancy, so you don't touch that school? There's a story in why you learn those things. What, you're descended from a wizard who was a powerful abjurist, and so the first arcane shot you learn is abjuration. But you can't learn this because you decide that, it's the opposite school that's against it. And so you can tell a story with how you got these powers. Or maybe you found like a cursed bow and this legacy was thrust upon you. And now you have magic arrows and you can't do anything about it but shoot them at people.
But shoot them at people, yeah.
As God intended. No, but I actually dig Arcane Archer after reading through it. They get a bunch of bonus damage to their attacks with arrows, and they increase in damage when they hit their pinnacle at 18th, which is really nice.
Yeah, they definitely rock.
Best fighters next. Best fighters.
My probably personal favorite is the Battle Master. Geez, man, what, like, in the idea of being able to customize the fighter, this takes that another level of complexity to customization. And again, the nice thing about Battle Master is it's not limited by melee or ranged. The Battle Master is very much the sort of, maybe not entirely thinking man's fighter, but you've learned maneuvers. You've learned ways to manipulate your opponents on the battlefield to your advantage, to your allies' advantage, to make your allies stronger on the battlefield. And I mean, honestly, it's one of those great subclasses that, gets more and more powerful over time, as they all do. But learning more maneuvers, and the story there can be great, is maybe, you trained in the Red Lotus School and they were all about, putting their opponents on the ground and then disarming them, whatever the case may be.
Sweep the leg, Johnny.
Sweep the leg. So whatever the case may be, you come from this school, so you took these maneuvers because they told a story of your training. Then you went out in the real world and you fought some trolls and beholders and giants, and you're like, sweeping the leg is great, but you know what also is good? I should probably, and you can sort of, as you have these experiences, be like, it would have been really nice if we could have pushed that enemy away from us. Hey, look at that. There's a maneuver all about pushing enemies away from you. Or, man, I wish there was a maneuver that I could let my barbarian attack when he's going full on ham. And then there's a maneuver that lets your allies attack. So Battlemaster is an excellent subclass for anyone who wants to kind of affect their opponents, give good status effects, and it speaks to a fighter who's kind of um, specialized in either melee, ranged, whatever the case may be. And the nice thing about Battlemaster is there's no wrong maneuver choice. And whether you have a melee maneuver, a ranged maneuver, and a ally helpful maneuver, or you have all three melee maneuvers, like it doesn't really matter. There's so much to do in that class that you're gonna have a good time either way.
And
And
I'll say this. Honestly, one of the coolest and I think out of combat aspects of a battle master is their ability to assess opponents. Given like a minute of study, they can learn key stats compared to their own,
yeah,
and that shit is awesome. Especially if you're helping your party be tactical.
oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, and it's a wonderful way, to kind of bring sort of some of that meta out of game information in game and sort of let your characters' experiences and stuff sort of translate that. If you learn of the trolls' vulnerability to fire, you can kind of talk about that in character sense to the rest of your teammates, and your wizard might be like, "Oh, that's really good to know," and all of a sudden there's a whole lot of fire on the
Oh,
battlefield.
oh yeah.
Um, and there's some really there's some great examples of Battle Master, and you can kind of see them in a lot of media because anytime someone gets tripped by a sweep to the leg or someone gets punched in the chest and flies out a window, you can look at that and go, well, that's a trip maneuver. Oh, well, that's a push maneuver or stuff like that. But Zorro was great at that stuff, disarming his opponents with some fancy rapier work. You know, pushing people off ledges as he, jumped from building to building. Um, Gladiator had some great examples of some maneuvers about cutting off legs and and other limbs, but there's a lot of good examples out there of the Battle Master, and it's maybe I'm biased because I like Battle Master a lot, but it's a very good subclass and lets you kind of really customize your fighter in ways that you don't see everywhere else. Gene, you wanna talk about these next guys?
Oh yes, it is your cavalier with his hair perfectly coiffed for war.
Wow.
These are your riders of Rohan, your classic knights in shining armor. They're just like these bulwarks of defense, while they're charging you mounted or just wading into combat. Uh, to that point where you might want to speak to your GM because if you love having a mount, it's a little bit mount specific, but not completely required. You become a lot more powerful with a mount, but you also lose out on certain abilities if you don't have one, but not a huge amount. They are really like I just read through them again as a double check, and whoo boy, the Cavalier's mark is very impressive. It makes it so, especially with their comboed with their multiple attacks, where when they hit people, they mark them kind of like with a nightly challenge. And if you don't fight them specifically, you suck against your other opponents. And they can retaliate against you on their next round, which is dope.
If I may, Gene, it's actually a really nice ability because as a fighter, if you're going that tank route, and honestly any martial class that wants to be a tank, it can be very difficult to get your enemy's attention. Just because you can be like, "Hey, I'm here and I have a sword and I have a shield and I'm gonna beat you," and they can be like, "I don't care. I'm gonna go stab the wizard." And you'd be like, "Please don't. Like, pretty please. I'd rather you didn't." And they're like, "I don't care." So like, there's not a lot of mechanical backing up of being like, I'm fighting you and and like you can go, but you're going to be worse off. And Cavalier, to the point Gene made, has a very good mechanic to be like, hey, if I'm fighting you, you notice and you cannot fight me, but you're going to be at a very big hindrance if you do.
And to that thing where if they hit a few people with this mark, uh, and those people decide to try to even move around the Cavalier threat, he can attack. They if it attacks someone else that's not him, they get advantage, and then the Cavalier, as their next round, gets to follow up with a free bonus action attack, which is just really awesome. They're just like kind of these like metal tanks that are they just punish opponents for not focusing on them. And out of combat, they get really good persuasion and diplomacy, as they're kind of based on like noble knighting and stuff, and riding and stuff. They're a really cool like your knight in shining armor, and I feel they're meant to be heavy armored because they don't seem to be very archery based. Their abilities don't say they can't be, but those reactions, because their pinnacle ability is just literally insane. When they hit their 18th pinnacle ability, they get a reaction every turn against their like marked opponents, and it's just bananas. BANANAS bananas.
Bananas.
I don't really got much more to say about Cavalier because they're really cool, and I kind of want to play one. I'm not gonna lie, like after reading them.
That's fair enough, Gene. I'll pick up the ball here. So next in line we have Champion. Very classic. You know, when you think classic fighter, you're thinking about a Champion. Um, you see these kind of, and I talked about this a little bit. You see these kind of, these kind of fighters in media all the time. I think Captain America is a great example of a champion. He's got high survivability. He's really good at being in a fight and staying in a fight. And that's kind of what champions are great at. Besides that little extra crit range, which everybody wants a piece of that crit range, but champions are one of the very few classes that get to kind of affect their crit range in 5th edition, which is kind of a big deal. Again, I'm sure people are thinking, how do I get the most bang out of my crits? Well, half orc champions, let me tell you, they can crit like a truck. Trucks that are known for critting, that is. But champions are, I'll be honest, Gene talked about sort of ease of accessibility with the fighter class. Champion takes that ease of accessibility to, it makes that a lot easier and accessible. There's not a lot of wacky rules or abilities you get.
I think, Renny, if I could say, a human bartender commented that essentially fighters go by the rule of KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And I really think Champion is the epitome of.
Are you saying he's the KISS champion, Gene?
He might be the KISS champion. KISS.
But yeah, no, I mean, listen, the champion's got survivability. It's literally, you are the best at being a fighter. You're just really good at it. And it's hard to put you down. And as a fighter, it's a lot of what you want. You want to stay in the fight and keep on fighting no matter the circumstance. Gene, you want to talk about this ridiculousness?
Jesus, of course I do. It's so ridiculous. So this is a Critical Role class, customized and made by Matt Mercer. It's a little busted, but not like that, not super. But it honestly reminds me very much of the old Sword Mage, where you could teleport around and create duplicates of yourself from in 4th and 3rd ed, I think. But so it's the idea of you kind of create echoes of your own possibilities. So like those fragments of your futures, you kind of summon them. Or if you wanted to play it a different way, which you 100% could, it could be the idea of like your magic fight and you summon a duplicate or like a more improved mirror image of yourself, or a clone. And these Echo Knights, they're really interesting because they manifest another version of yourself, which has very few hit points. It's kind of like a hologram, if you will. But you can take actions and stuff through it. And so you can switch your spaces with it. You can attack through it. As you get more powerful with it, you can give it extra attacks. You can also start taking reactions through it, which is really cool because now there's 2 of you, essentially. You don't get any more actions.
You're never alone when you're an Echo Knight.
Yeah, you can just constantly high-five yourself as a free action. I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in the rules.
Yep. I've seen it.
And uh, and also a really neat thing about it is you can also, like, if you know that you're gonna go somewhere dangerous, let's say, but you don't want to get caught with your pants down. In their mid-level ability, they can send their consciousness through their echo. Well, technically, that means they can also take their attacks, all their reactions, and do everything they normally could, but in their echo's body, as long as it's within 1,000 feet. But that's pretty cool if you don't want to get super close. Um, the other later on, you can throw your echoes violently in defense of your friends and others, and just watch them explode. Uh,
Don't worry, I'll save you.
yeah. And also, as you get more powerful and understand the idea of like this harnessed extra possibility, you essentially, when your echo dies, you start gaining temporary hit points because you get a limited amount of echoes you can create. And then their capstone ability is, why, one person's not enough. Let's have two. And so they get two echoes when they summon their echoes. And so now you got three of you where you can spread your attacks out that you as a fighter at that level probably have 3 to 4. So you're spreading them out through all your echoes, gaining extra attacks, taking your reaction from any one of them, and you can teleport to any spot they're in as long as they're within 30 of you. So you kind of make like a death triangle, and that's kind of cool.
It's pretty dope.
Yeah, I mean, and like, so if you wanted to like look at it like multiple man from like Marvel, creating minor clones of himself, Nightcrawler with his teleportation. Yeah, they have mobility, which is awesome because like you could jump to an echo spot, it jumps to your spot. Let's say you're held down or you're restrained. Well, now your echo's restrained, you're not. You can also, use an out of combat utility of, you got this extra person. So you're talking to the person and you send your echo to scout around and look upstairs. Like it has physical touch, it has all those cool things. So think of it having like a weaker version of you, but it still has all your stuff, and that's pretty cool. So I think there's a lot of versatility in Echo Knight. I think you probably have to talk to your GM depending on what how high fantasy and how it would fit in the world, because it may not fit in every world.
Right.
And then yeah, so I think that's kind of my talk on. I'm trying to think if I can think of any examples of other Echo Knights, but it's kind of like almost a little bit of the Jedi thing of like having other Force like Jedis coming in and helping you, like those kind of flashes. So it's like, yeah, it's like there's just a lot going on with Echo Knight, and the whole point of it is that you summon forth extra versions of yourself, or depending on how you flavor it, could be your ancestors, it could be your generation's line. Maybe you have a family fucking heritage or lineage of this crazy thing where you summon your father and his grandfather and blah blah blah.
Yeah, no, they're really cool. I've yet to play one. I don't think Gene's ever played one
I
either.
have never. I've only seen it played.
But I'll be honest, they're really neat. And it'd be cool to check out. But another neat subclass is Eldritch Knight. They, there is a term that gets thrown around in a lot of D&D and fantasy kind of role play games. It's called a gish. And for the uninitiated, a gish is someone who kind of balances the sort of martial combat with spell casting. And if you're doing it right, kind of like brings the two together. Um, and Eldritch Knight is a perfect example of being able to do that. And I'll be honest, I really like the Eldritch Knight class. I'm a big fan of spell casting. You'll see with a lot of characters that I play, they tend to get spells at some point or another. Even when I start them out as barbarians, they just end up having spells. Um, but Eldritch Knight is great as a fighter because there's a lot of powerful spells out there. And while you don't get access to some of the higher level spells, listen, your fighter being able to cast invisibility, pretty awesome. Um, and your fighter having some ranged attacks that are fairly potent is really nice. And we'll talk about some of why that's really important later on. But having the options of being like close in melee and being effective, and still being effective at ranged, again, it really speaks to that versatility of fighter. And Eldritch Knight does it really well. Being able to blend magic and melee in the same round of combat when you get higher levels. And again, you may not deal as much damage or whatever, but I'm going to tell you, it feels awesome. When you lightning bolt the three orcs down one line and slash at the commander with your sword, you're just like, I feel great right now. It is a cool visual class. And again, with any of these subclasses, there's a story there. Did you flunk out of wizard school, and maybe you couldn't cut it as a wizard, but you really were fascinated by the blade and whatever, and you took some stuff from the wizard school because you had to learn something while you were there, and maybe you took your spell book, and that's sort of how you got to where you are. Is there a lineage? Are you from this elven line of powerful wizards, and maybe you're kind of the black sheep who's like, I don't want to be a wizard, but you grew up around it. And there's any number of things. But Eldritch Knight is a really cool example of how to bridge the gap between two very separate worlds, and kind of bringing it together in a cool way. Gene, you wanna talk about slinging guns?
I hate it, but yeah, I will. I'm gonna talk about another custom class that has been. It was from Critical Role as well, but I don't think it was officially produced by them in that capacity because it was GM's Guild. But whatever, not important. It's called the Gunslinger. Think of like your Annie Oakley, your Doc Holliday, or your mad scientist who invented a gun.
I've invented a gun.
A big thing about this class is they are experimental. So the guns generally have high and cool capacities for damage and abilities and ranges, but they also come with a little bit of malfunction and randomness.
Yeah, there's a little bit of risk to reward ratio with the gunslinger.
And so they get a lot of they get this thing called trick shots, which is very similar to a battle master's maneuvers, where they can tack on some spit and venom with their shot. Bouncing it around corners, shooting through people. And they also get, I think, a really cool mechanic called grit, where as they murder their way through high noon, they you
just gotta scream tarnation.
Yeah.
Tarnation.
Yeah. As they crit or kill their way through a campaign, they can recover these grit points and they can be spent to do these insane maneuvers. And so they have a very recoverable style of play because unlike Battle Master or a lot of these other classes, subclasses of fighter, where you need to take short rests and long rests to recover some of your bigger abilities, they get them back as they kill people. And that's pretty cool because you're a fighter, so guess what you're really good at? Murdering. But as DJ Poser put through, yeah, the jamming is terrible because most guns have a malfunction on 1, 2, or 3 depending on the power level of the gun, and it's a very GM heavy class where you have to make sure your GM's okay with it. You can design new guns with your GM specifically to make sure it does not break the rules. But the more potent and powerful you make your weapon, the higher the malfunction, because it's just, you're in a medieval game likely, and so technology is not as reliable. And when you jam your gun, it sucks because you have a chance to fix it, but if you fail that chance, your gun is broken, and it takes time and money to repair that weapon out of combat. So, depending on if you're stuck in the middle of a jungle, you might not have those parts. Plus, you also have to make your own ammunition. That kind of sucks too. You can't just be like, I walk into the blacksmith, I walk in and get arrows or bolts, or like, what? Huh? Gunpowder? Who?
Bullets? What?
Boule? Yeah, like that land shark went away. But, so, so they have a lot of cool things that kind of trigger off of crits. They have a lot of these neat abilities to make their bullets do special trick shots. Their weapons can have 3 or 4 shots, so that's kind of nice where you don't have to
Yeah.
worry too much about the reload property. Eventually, they can get some trick shots involving quick reloads, so you don't have to worry so much about that. And then later on, they get a crazy thing where they can essentially spend grit to make their weapon do insane amounts of damage, but it increases the malfunction a huge amount. So it's a high risk, high reward that also makes it so. Yeah, it doesn't. It's a really cool burst damage, but it comes at a risk where your gun is going to maybe break if you roll very shittily. Because it's not what AC you hit; it is what you roll on the die. So if you roll their malfunction, even if you would have hit, it still misses and malfunctions. So take that risk and reward. And besides that, yeah, it's neat. Do you want to be a dude who has a super sweet gun that has a chance to break? Do it. You'll feel real cool when you pull it off. Also, you have a gun, and everyone has swords and shields and magic, but you have the greatest magic of them all, a fucking gun.
A fucking gun.
But I think that's all I have to really say about Gunslinger.
Cool. I'll pick it up with Psy Warrior. Um, this is a subclass that came out fairly recently in Tasha's, and pretty much everything that's come out of Tasha's is it's powerful, it's good, but it's flavorful too, which is really nice. Um, and I think the best way to think about a Psy Warrior is motherfucking Jedi. um, and sans lightsaber though, you get a TK, you get to hit your opponents harder with psychic force, you get to shield others with psychic force, you get to do super Jedi leaps, to have this amazing mobility, and you get the a lot of side dice that sort of power up with you as you level up. And I'll be honest, all in all, I think that the Psy Warrior is a very powerful choice. And with a lot of your subclass, you don't always have to check it with your GM. It's kind of nice because letting your GM know what you're going to go with can kind of give them opportunities for story. But Psy Warrior is nice because you are not arcane like the Arcane Archer or the Eldritch Knight. You are not purely martial like a champion or a battle master or cavalier or something. You get this kind of alternate power source, which is kind of a cool thing to explore if your GM and you kind of work together. Um, psionics are they're kind of the bastard child of D&D because I constantly feel like they get kicked around, and sometimes they show up and they're neat, and other times D&D's like, no, fuck, stop it. um, but clearly, fifth edition at least is starting to kind of dip their toes into psionics and how it impacts the world of fifth edition. And Star Warrior is an awesome display of how a sort of warrior would use psychic power to augment their already potent fighting ability. Um, and I mean, honestly, I've not played a Psy Warrior, but we in one of Gene's games actually, one of our party members is a Psy Warrior, and let me tell you, he when he gets going and he starts pouring on the psychic power, you notice, and he's very mobile. He's got great damage. He's saved my character's ass a bunch of times. So there's a lot of the nice thing with there. There's a lot of versatility. There's obviously offense, there's defense and mobility, and those are kind of like the three. the three balancing act you're always trying to do to some greater or lesser degree as a fighter is how do I have decent offense, but I don't ignore defense, but I need a little bit of mobility. And this class is just like, here's those three things. It's just for you now. Um, so yeah, Psy Warrior is an excellent
It's
choice.
the
I will
five
say,
Ds of dodgeball.
dip, dive, duck, dodge,
It's an
and
extra dodge, but it's somewhere in the middle.
dodge, dodge, dodge.
So many dodges.
I will say, oh, you threw me off. Oh, but the one thing about Psy Warrior, and there's a few others, um, is that Psy Warrior is one of the few fighter classes that requires a decent intelligence score to be effective. And again, a lot of fighters can kind of get by on like strength, con, dex, sometimes in that order, but like you can just get by with those three. This one, you're gonna have to kind of spread yourself out a little more because you don't need an amazing intelligence. Sure, it helps, but you want a decent intelligence. And I think that kind of covers Psy Warrior.
Oh yeah, they're fucking dope.
Gene, you want to talk a little bit about Purple Dragon Knights, aka Banneret?
Yeah. I really dig Purple Dragon Knights / Bannerets. Honestly, I think they are probably up there in simplicity with Champion. Because realistically, their abilities just give other people stuff when you use your core abilities. Um,
Very straightforward.
yeah, their main thing, they're good at persuasion. Think of it as like your noble, your noble knight, a warlord, a leader of a band of brothers, like your mercenary captain. They're all about they're still awesome because they're fighters, but they give everyone else around them benefits for them being a fighter. So when they recover, when they call upon their second win, their battle brothers also heal. When they surge forward in that cinematic action, well, their buddy Bucky gets that extra attack. When the dragon roars and they indomitably shake off its fear, well, their friend to the left of them also is indomitable. And so they're all about like using their abilities, but they're really team players in that style of when they use their abilities, they're also helping their friends. And so I think for Purple Dragon Knights or Bannerets, they're really good as party support fighters. Like they're still gonna hit, they're still gonna do what a fighter does. But if it's like if you are somehow playing a solo game, which you can, I don't think a Purple Dragon Knight would be the best choice for that option because you're really a team player.
Oh, big time. Oh yeah.
And they're also schmoozers and talkers and like using that like nobility to kind of talk their way into conversations. So yeah, any kind of noble leader is what you can is what I would think for this, or anyone leading a band of people. I think Robin Hood could also fall in this if you're going for the more like medieval story and less powers Robin Hood, where he led the merry men. He could be considered a banneret, this, or like an unlanded lord who's leading a group. And so you can be many different things. And really, and also like Renny and I were very much a fan of the 4th edition Warlord. I think it was a very cool class. And I don't know if this is the best version of it, but it's one of the more current versions we have besides Battlemaster to make a decent Warlord.
Yeah, definitely.
I know in my game, I ran a game a long time ago back when 5th was young, and they had a paladin NPC, and he got stripped of his paladin powers, and to kind of make up, because he still wouldn't have lost the ability to fight, I made him a banneret to help support the party, and I think it was a really good fit, and it was a lot of fun. So Renny, why don't you talk about this new one? It's super cool.
Yeah, totally. So another one out of Tasha's are these guys called Rune Knights, and I gotta say, I am a big fan of Rune Knights. I think they bring a lot of flavor and a lot of story before you even touch their abilities. This sort of like rune caster with sort of giant origins. Um, and that affecting you, and sometimes affecting you very personally. Sometimes you affect the battlefield. Um, and I think this subclass, in my opinion, gets a lot of things right. Because you sort of have a signature combat power, which I don't remember the name of it, but I call it get huge, because you get fucking huge. You start out as large, but eventually you get huge. But you just get to get big. You do a little extra damage. You're better at strength based stuff, and it's like nobody's gonna be like, oh, whatever. Joe's fighting again. Everyone's gonna be like, that dude's huge. What the fuck's going on with that guy? People will. You get to really make your mark on the battlefield, which I really like. In my opinion, they make excellent tanks. Um, and those runes, the real success in my opinion, is that the runes are great because each one has a sort of active ability, and some of them are very strong, some of them are very situational, but they all have an out of combat ability. There's one that adds to your smithing checks. There's others that add to skill rolls that you may not be great at, or some that you are good at and now you're really good at. And that to me is one of the big successes of Rune Knight. Besides getting huge, which is just fun. Like it's just fun to be getting huge whenever you want.
I mean, getting huge with that reach increase at the higher end is really cool.
Yeah. I mean, and again, there is some mechanical power there too. Is getting big and having a reach weapon. Well, all of a sudden that reach just kind of doubled or tripled in how far you can extend your threat on the battlefield. So I feel like there's a lot of versatility in Rune Knight. Um, I think that there's a lot of story to be told with the Rune Knight. And again, something me and Gene are going to touch on at the very end, and we're almost there. But the Rune Knight it's a cool class. So I say check it out if you're interested in carving runes. And the nice thing about those runes is you can use them on your friends too. And not a lot of subclasses are like, oh, friends. And there's an occasional Gene just talked about the bannerets, which are all about supporting your friends. But the Rune Knight is one of the few on the list that some of your runes can benefit your allies, which is really nice. Gene, would you like to talk to us about samurai, or as I like to call them, the blender eye,
Yeah, will it blend the class?
the
Yeah.
subclass?
So samurai. I mean, you could think of your classic samurai movies, your Kurosawa hero, but it doesn't need to be Asian themed because, like, when I think of samurai, one of their key abilities is fighting spirit, and it literally punches me in the face with John Carter's of Mars. Because if you ever read any of the John Carter books, he always refers to his Virginian fighting spirit, which pushes him over the edge or makes him be able to do these extreme things like, because, I'm a 40-year-old middle-aged man who has no athletic prowess, my fighting Virginian spirit. Because, like, he described himself, like, I don't think this guy's buff at all, but sure, I guess because you're from Virginia, you got it. But they kind of call on this spirit, and it kind of gives them this, like, just ability to shred. Like, it's the only way to describe it. It lends them advantage to all of their attacks in that round, which is just great because that's, double the dice, double the pain. And they can also trade off some of that advantage to get extra attacks. Uh, yeah, they get temporary hit points because of this fighting spirit, which makes them last longer, fight harder, and eventually they get this undying ability where, like, you kill them and they keep hitting you until they don't. Um, and they also can, like, they're just really neat besides all of these combat abilities and this fighting spirit, this like indeterminable, ability, they also kind of get a little bit of like elegance mixed with that, where they get some skills that you may not find on your classic fighter.
I feel like they have a very warrior poet kind of feel.
Yeah, they do, or even like a historian, or maybe it's a really neat thing. A warrior poet is definitely a great way to put it, but without any of that like bardic magic flair. It's like they're kind of like these deeply philosophical warriors who call upon this like spirit inside them, which is not magical. It's just what it is, and it's just who they are. They have this. While all fighters have grit and determination, they have a fighting spirit. Like I also feel like there's definitely some anime inspirations you can go with besides not just samurais.
Sure.
Of like that drill that can drill through the heavens, like some people, Kamina, and it's like they have all these people who like who are just like they just get that look, that moment, they call upon it, and now they're just a bit tougher, and they hit you, and they just blend. They blend because
will it blend?
And the answer is likely yes. The answer is likely yes. Because they have what, as Renny and I were discussing, a tremendous ability to be one of the only classes that can do 10 attacks a round, which is literally insane. Maybe 11 if they're hasted, because good times.
Yeah.
But like
samurai. Oof.
Yeah, but it's you want to will it blend? Like if 10 to 11 attacks can't do the job, well, you probably need a party to back you up.
Right. And I think actually, ending with the samurai subclass is good because, any of these subclasses, right? If you're like, hey, I want to be an arcane archer, but like I want my arcane archer to be like this demon showed me demonic runes and I etched them into my arrow. Awesome, cool. The thing that the point I'm trying to make here is that don't let the sort of the title or even the description or even the abilities how they're laid out, don't let that limit you on the flavor of how you want to present your your version of this class and sort of the story that your character is telling with their abilities. Something we talked about in our first episode. But like Gene was saying with the Echo Knight, maybe you summon your ancestors because you have this sort of this ancestral tribe you come from, and you keep a piece from each person in your family line, and you call on them to literally call on them in combat. Cool. As always, talk to your GM and run it by them because your version of things may not line up with the kind of stories they're telling. And this is collaboration, so always work together. But Psy Warrior can be interpreted a million ways. It could be psychic power. It could be you have a fey spirit trapped inside of you, and you somehow learn to tap into its fey magic. And that's just in to me at least, that's just as acceptable as I have a magic brain that lets me magic brain.
Yeah, and your Cavalier can be, Brock Hardmeat, All-American football star, who's a peerless athlete.
It's true. Gene does love Brock Hardmeat.
He's the greatest character to always be played.
Right. And Rune Knight, and while there's a lot of Rune Knight is very embroiled in giant culture, you're like, hey, what about dwarves? Could I be like maybe part of a lineage of dwarves who learned ancient rune magic that maybe isn't used in sort of traditional magic today, and work with your GM to see if that's a path you can take.
Or another option, if your GM's willing, what happens if you're a Rune Knight but it's Draconic? So instead of giant language, you get Draconic, and it's all based on you growing huge and becoming more Draconic. So that could be if you're like a Dragonborn and you become a huge Dragonborn, well, maybe that could be a neat way to flavor it. That's really, again, between you and your GM, can always be likely determined as long as it's not unbalancing. Or if it is unbalancing and your GM's cool with it, outdo you, I guess.
Right, right, right. Um, but and that's kind of the beauty of fifth edition, and it's why we constantly see homebrew, um, is because it's ultimately endlessly customizable. And while there's a lot of subclasses that go with fighter, you might want to be something that doesn't fit within these, I don't know, what, a dozen or 10 subclasses that are here. And if that's the case, cool, work with your GM. But more than likely, you can find a set of abilities, a set of powers, whatever, that works within line with something that already exists. Um, so yeah, while that's kind of our dungeon delve on the subclasses, just remember it's your story, or
Yeah,
tell it how you want.
and depending on the game, you may want to focus on the no magic. Like if you're low, if you're a low fantasy, low magic world, there's a plenty of fighter options that are non-magical, and that's
Right.
kind of nice because you might be in that gritty dark fantasy where there's no healers, there's no fireballs. Well, cool, you got a plenty of options.
Yeah, totally. All right, I think we're about to hit our second to last room. So you know what time it is, Gene.
Time
Time
for
for initiative.
time for me to roll poorly because that's what it sounds like. No, I think I win at least one room. That's the rule. It's definitely programmed in.
It might not be tonight. Just gonna say,
Not
might
to,
not be tonight.
I don't know. Dude, that's like 320. I think you're fucking rigging the dice. I don't know how. That is 320s in a row. I'm not
I'll say
looking.
this: if I'm rigging the die, I'm so good at it. I don't even know how I did it.
Okay, I'm looking because I don't know what you
Oh yeah,
did.
now Gene's got to check because he thinks I'm cheating. In this totally made up
Yeah,
initiative doesn't
yeah,
matter.
you've gotten 3 natural 20s. You are never
Well,
allowed to roll with
Gene
night.
checks my math for things that don't matter.
So bad.
This last room is we're going to talk. We talked about a lot of the reasons that fighters are cool, that the reasons that they make cool stories, that they make excellent party members, and that there's a story to be told within the realm of the fighter. However, it's not without its weaknesses, and this is true for every class. Um, and we're going to kind of touch on some of the weaknesses that we know of. There might be some out there that you think of or that you've seen, but these are the ones that we kind of notice that are kind of big glaring weaknesses, and they change depending on your subclass a little bit. But the first one I'm going to touch on is you are a very equipment dependent character. When a magic sword shows up, or a magic spear, or a magic hammer shows up, you know, it might be nice for the cleric to have it, but you as a fighter, you need a magic weapon to be able to function in the world of fighting monsters that require a magic weapon to be hurt, because it's the only way that overcome conflict is with this weapon. Um, and and it gets even harder if you sort of specialize as a two-hander, as a dual wielder, as a archery fighter. Those very specific equipment needs are kind of a glaring weakness, because again, hopefully your GM is sort of not custom tailoring a treasure to you, but like, there should be some amount of like, well, I've seen 19 pole arms, but I'm an archer, so those are nice. Those magic pole arms look very nice on my wall, but they don't do a lot for me. But it can be a problem, uh, that you are very reliant on having good armor, good weapon, and you probably want a utility item that gives you some mobility, that gives you some crowd control or utility effect. And again, I'm not going to go into the hundreds of magic items that are good for a fighter, but a solid weapon, solid armor, and a utility item of some kind is probably what you're going to need to be effective. And again, each campaign's different. Depending, like Gene was saying, you might have a grim, dark fantasy world where, as long as you have your iron longsword and chain hauberk, you're okay, and that's awesome, great. But there's much more higher fantasy games out there that are going to require you to be a little more on the fantastical side of things. And as much as it is a weakness that you are very dependent on your equipment, the nice thing is you can kind of have these signature weapons or signature items that that again tell a story as much as your class, your choices, your role play, your vengeance bow that you got from that demon dude who messed up your family. Well, that bow is history, that bow is story, and the way that you use it has story too. So that's one of the first ones. Gene, you want to hit another one of these fighter
Yeah.
weaknesses that we have?
So again, depending, as this is always a choice, each choice comes with a strength and weakness. And so if you become a completely melee focused fighter, so you've specialized in a weapon, all your feats focus on this weapon type of either one-handed, two-handed, or even bow, you run into uh, issues when things are either out of your range or like too close. So if you are a melee fighter and something's flying or flying away, as often
That's a problem.
creatures are smart, so they're going to be smart about things. Some of them monsters as you get higher level. Um, then that becomes a problem. You need to compensate again, as Rennie said, with mobility. So an item of flying or something, or hopefully you have a wizard that helps you out, buddy. Um, but those melee focused warriors and fighters often have a hard time. They hit harder and they generally do a lot of cool things, but you need to be ready that those can happen. And now, the same thing can happen if you are specifically a ranged fighter. Now, there are ways to compensate for being a ranged fighter in melee, but because you get a bunch of these ASI slash feats, and if your campaign uses feats, you can compensate for close combat, but you also now lose out on reaction attacks because you're using a ranged weapon and not a melee one. And so you don't defend your allies, and it becomes a little bit harder for you to pick off and do what you want to do. And so, depending on how you focus, if you go melee or range, the opposite can essentially be your weakness. And also, if you're a defending person and your party spreads out, or there's only one enemy, that it can become there's that weakness that everyone's going to have a weakness, but you need to be ready. And there are ways that you, as playing this fighter, can maybe find items, take the feats, or have specifically your race could help out, or your lineage or background might give. I don't know. There's things that can help you assuage these weaknesses or shore up, but generally you're still likely going to hit those roadblocks. So if
Yeah.
you're melee, range is going to be rough. If you're range, getting cornered in melee, unless you take specific things to assuage that, gonna get rough for you. If you're a defender and people are rushing all around you, generally to defend people you need to be close. So you gotta worry about these things, and those are kind of your weaknesses in those aspects.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, and sometimes it's a tactical thing. Sometimes, your party will tend to tactically group up because they know if they hang around the fighter, he's going to take aggro, or they're going to spread out because they know, it's and it'll sort of hopefully you'll get better at it as you do more of it. Gene kind of talked about this, so I'm gonna kind of not skip it, but I'm gonna just really touch on it. There's not a lot of mobility baked into the fighter class. There are a few subclasses that are the exception to the rule there, but mobility is always an issue for you. Vertical mobility, especially flight, is hard. But yeah, so mobility is definitely an area that they certainly they do not thrive. But I'm going to move into the next sort of one of their other weaknesses is their out of combat utility is very limited. Again, there are subclasses that help with this, but fighter is probably one of the classes that is affected by out of combat utility the most. Um, you certainly will have skills from class and background and lineage. You will have tool trainings, which is again all good stuff, but a lot of your abilities, subclasses included, are going to focus on combat, and there are a limited number of ones that help you out of combat, but it's going to be a little bit of you on the player and your character to find ways to be useful. And again, sometimes being useful is, hey, are you doing something? I'd like to help you. And just handing your buddy advantage on the thing they're doing, great. So it is one of those hurdles you're gonna run into probably a fair bit as a fighter. Gene, you want to talk about the next one?
Yeah. So the another thing to kind of tack on is you're likely a physical character with strength, dex, and con, which Renny talked about a little bit. So when you're making saving throws or skill checks that don't involve those, unless you built your character with those specific stats in mind, your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma might suffer depending on how you build your character. This is not for you can not everyone does min maxing or does spreads. You can roll randomly and assign it as you go, but generally non-physical saves are going to be difficult for you. Hitting the fighter with a hold person or anything that relies on those stats generally is going to fuck them up.
Rough, buddy.
As our Psy Warrior in our last game did not make an intelligence save. He's just not proficient in it, not his or wisdom save. He's just he's great, but not for that. But besides that, now going on to the true focus of this, which is the really big weakness of a fighter, which with all its awesomeness and focus, is that at higher levels they can be really outshined by primary spellcasters. When you start looking into those 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, really 6th through 9th level spells. Now, while spellcasters only get very limited amounts of them, they are literally insane. You can rip a fabric in reality and shift through a plane. Sorry, I don't care how hard you hit a sword. It's really hard to cut a sword through a plane of existence. So it's just like spellcast. Like as a fighter, you might feel outdone sometimes by these wizards, by druids, by clerics, maybe warlocks, but we won't talk about that. We definitely don't have biases against warlocks. But the whole point about it is you going in as a fighter and knowing that ahead of time is that you still have a very important role to play. Guess what? A wizard is going to run out of those really cool spells. You know it's never going to run out? Your fucking sword arm. You might get some tennis elbow occasionally, but that won't affect your dice.
You just use that second wind cream. And
Yeah.
just rub it out
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the whole point. Like, you're good at the thing you're good at. And be okay with that. You're going to be exceptional at it. And that's cool. The wizard's going to be exceptional at doing insane magic. But they also have insane bookkeeping that you don't have to fucking worry about. When they're just pouring hundreds of gold into their spell book, and you're just like sharpening your sword, being like, that sucks, buddy. I just bought myself this new plate mail. It's fucking dope.
Yeah. No, and that's a great sum up, Gene. And I think it's time for us to take a bit of a rest in this dungeon.
A dip, if you will.
A what?
A dip.
A dip, if you may. In the room of reflection.
Look at my sweet shitty fountain.
Sparkles. Yeah, so guys, we're just going to kind of talk about just sort of some odds and ends that didn't fit into some of the rooms that we explored in this dungeon. Some of it is going to be entirely personal opinions, like a lot of what you just heard. But something I want to talk about is, and honestly, and it's something that I am the most guilty of, I don't remember the last time I played a pure fighter, and I mean a non-multi-classed fighter. I find that fighter is a great addition to a lot of classes. If you are going to be in the shit, or if you're going to be a martial class, sometimes ranged, sometimes close up, just a little bit of fighter can go a very long way. And I've also played a fighter who was 17 levels of fighter and only a little bit of a barbarian, but I used another class to kind of shore up what I did as a fighter. Um, and there are some multi-class options that are better than others depending on what abilities you're interested in, and we won't get into the cost benefit ratio of multiclassing, but fighter is one of those excellent classes, whether you go a lot of fighter with just a dip in something else to kind of give you a few tricks, or give you a strength, or turn a weakness into a strength or something like that. And it's also a great, if and for a perfect example, I'm currently playing a Tempest cleric, um, and Tempest clerics are very much modeled to be warrior clerics. You get heavy armor, you get martial weapons. Oh, some of your abilities are, hey, did you touch me and I didn't want you to touch me? Lightning, it's here for you. Um, and so I took a little bit of fighter, and I went battle master, which again, very guilty of. I'm awfully fond of the battle master subclass. But I went a little bit of fighter to kind of shore up. I get into fights a lot, and listen, having an action surge as a spellcaster, you're never going to be sad. In fact, you are going to literally, it's going to be your birthday every time you use action surge as a full spellcaster. Getting a free heal, even if you are 3 levels of fighter, a D10 plus 3 healing, you're never sad about it. And then whatever subclass you end up taking, as long as you take one that meshes well with what you can do, you can find a lot of mileage out of it. Uh, and Gene, I know Gene's multi-classed as fighters of
So
time.
many. I mean, you forgot to mention, like, you didn't mention it, but you didn't truly mention it. The ridiculous action surge ability to cast 2 spells in one round, which no.
That's in the room of reflection. We were getting there. Um, but and I will say there is a lot of guys. There is so much debate about action surge, and I can't tell you like. So one of my first characters I played in Adventurers League, which is the Wizards of the Coast sanctioned, gaming that we play. I made a fighter. I was a fighter barbarian, and I used action surge. And to this day, and that was a character I played. Gee, when did I create that character? 5 years ago,
I think more.
maybe more. But I made that character 5 years ago, and to this day, this past weekend, I still have people being like, "How does action surge work?" But it says, and there's a lot, right? Do your own research. Have you and your GM come up to a decision. But what I have found, which is the rules as written, is if you action surge, you can sort of break the rule, quote unquote, of on your turn, if you cast a spell, a leveled spell, you can't cast another spell, a leveled spell as a bonus action. Action surge is the one thing in the whole entirety of D&D, besides epic magic items or something like that, where you can go fireball, action surge, fireball. And again, GMs are going to have their own opinions, and these are our opinions. Granted, they're backed up by Jeremy Crawford, but he's not here to defend himself. So, um, but that's one of the great uses of multi-classing fighter wizard. In fact, I have a fighter wizard. Maybe not exactly for that reason, but it certainly
It
helps.
doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt. But yeah, fighters, like, there's a lot of good classes that mesh with other classes, and again, it's all dependent, right? It's all dependent on your stats, dependent on what function. But fighter is probably in like the top 3 best multi-classing classes, and it's probably the top slot.
Yeah, honestly, those first 3 levels are so front loaded with your fighting style, your second wind, your action surge, and then an archetype that gives you something dope. Like, it's almost hard to pass up. I know I played a rogue. I multiclassed into fighter to kind of get some extra versatility and some hitting. I've played a full fighter who dipped into warlock, and I was mostly a battle master because they're amazing. But those warlock dice really helped also, because nothing makes people sad when you hit them with as a duelist with a shadow blade. Um,
Shadowblade, man,
it's one
that
hell
thing
of a
is
drug.
gross.
It's one hell of a drug. But yeah. I mean, like you were going on, like there were some awesome feat combos and builds with fighters. So like if you want to hit people with big weapons, being a fighter is one of the easiest and very powerful ways to do it. If you want to hit people with a single weapon and shield and hit hard, also ways to up that by like, focusing on that or using your shield to control the battlefield around you, or being an archer who can fire at 300 feet away for
Without disadvantage.
incredible amounts of damage, or and also be up close in personal combat with their bow, because you got those extra feats, you have those extra stats to back up that kind of fighting. Yeah, there's just a lot of cool feat combos. Especially, there's a few new ones in Tasha that also let you hyper focus on damage types, which I think is a very interesting and neat
Oh yeah, no, it's very cool.
to make your fighter even more flavorful. Like heck, I could see you if you wanted to be a dope ass pole arm dude, like you could take 3 feats right into that with like heavy weapon master, pole arm fighter, whatever the pole arm one is, and also piercer or slasher. And like now you have 3 feats invested in your weapon, but that also means that when you use that weapon, it is going to be impressive.
Yeah, everyone's gonna be like, oh god,
Oh boy,
there he
he
goes.
showed up today. He showed up. That
Yeah.
guy showed up.
And listen, we're not gonna go into builds because there are an endless number of them. But fighter has a lot of potential for some powerful builds in fifth edition, and beyond just powerful builds, just it is a very versatile class depending on the story you want to tell, because there's so many feats and ability score increases there. They don't need to live in one role. You build your fighter with the right subclass and feats, you can kind of do a lot of things. Um, so yeah, I mean, and listen, one of the characters that I was talking about earlier is this character Lavitz Ray Cypress, who is a golden idiot that I love until the end of time. But I was mostly fighter and a little bit of barbarian, and like, don't get me wrong, the fun of that character was the role play and me and Gene being literally the biggest idiots we could be. And let me tell you, we can be really big
It's
idiots.
it's impressive.
um, but some of the like, as much fun as it was out of combat, let me tell you, when I was in combat, everyone was like, Lavitz is just going to go do Lavitz, and he is just going to murderate that thing into next
I'll
year.
tell you,
And I did.
if you want to really see a fighter just excel, just drop a holy weapon on them
Yeah,
and
dear, dear Jeebus.
just watch them action surge through 5 enemies, and it's a lightning bolt is cool, but that was just too much, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And again, we're not going to go into every single one, but just very quickly, I was this battle master. I rolled up on this fight, and Gene, there's some story elements here that our character's father, who was estranged, because we were a family, we played a family, and our father was estranged. And in this particular combat, just before, we met our estranged father. Now, my character had very complex feelings about dad, and Gene's character, who was the paladin, and I'm still not sure how this all checks out in the paladin code book. Um, but he really kind of like twisted up my emotions and sort of did the like, do it for dad or he'll be disappointed in you. You better not disappoint him. And so he cast a holy weapon on me, and I was like, I go ham. I go 100% ham, and I charged forward. I used all of my maneuver dice in an action surge. I was a polearm master, and I did. Gene, do you remember? I think I did 170.
I think you did more. Because
I
you
don't know.
hit every single time, and it was just incredible.
Yeah, I hit every single time, and there was like 5 enemies, so I hit the leader, and by like my 6th attack, I had killed the leader, and so like I dropped the last 2 attacks, maybe 3, like 2 attacks into one of the mooks. But I just like the fight opened, I ran up and killed the leader of the bad guy, and then it was just like, oh, okay, and then the fight very quickly ended. But it was just like, listen, yeah, as a fighter, I didn't do anything but go, I just did this a lot and it was really effective. And and listen, if you can take out a particularly powerful enemy before it can hurt your friends, that's a particularly good strategy. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had there, story wise, in combat, out of combat. And we hope you I don't know, we hope you check out the class because it's worth a playthrough.
So unfortunately, we don't have many questions. We got one question that we didn't get to answer, which was from DJ Poser, which is, does he believe we should use high variance dice for Gunslinger? And I would say yes. Now I don't know what the split is on the high variance die. I know you have one.
I can tell you.
But I don't imagine. So if it's, I don't know how low is the low variance, or how high is the low variance. Like 1 through what number is the low?
I want to say it's 1 through 6, maybe 7.
So that's the reason why I would say that would be a better die, because generally malfunction is generally like a 1, 2, or 3. So if you have 4, 5, 6, and then like 16 through 20, I feel like more numbers would be in your favor. Now, again, that would be a question you need to bring up with your GM if you're allowed to use high variance dice. But I think that might push you on an edge toward your own side. But you have a whole lot more 1s and 2s and 3s than most other dice, so it may turn out that it would balance itself out.
I mean, I'll say this. I think Gene makes a great point, but I think the whole part of Gunslinger is high risk, high reward. And if you want to use high variance because you want to be like highest risk, highest reward, as a GM, I'd be like, cool. Go ahead.
I mean, and with the Gunslinger gets that 1920 crit, so you're really stacking that high deck, but that low deck is gonna come for you with a vengeance.
It's gonna get you. Like, it's gonna get you.
So,
yeah, as a GM, I would say sure, because you are gonna be really impressive. And then there's times where you're gonna look at your gun and there's a smoking crater in the ground, and all your friends are gonna be like, "What are you doing?" And you're gonna be like, "I don't know, man."
I mean, we saw that in the first campaign of Critical Role without high variance dice.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So yeah, I'd say case to case, but me, totally.
All right. Well, I think that's about it. At least
no
in
problem.
the room of reflection.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was the dungeon of the fighter class, and there might be other classes that we explore. We will really try not to crap all over Warlock.
Yeah, if you pay Renny money, he might actually do Warlock enthusiastically.
I mean, how much money? Yeah.
$1.
But yeah. So, and again, guys, there might be a week we talk about storytelling. There might be a week we talk about a totally different hobby than gaming that we're into that we want to just share with you guys. So
yeah,
thanks for sitting with us for a while. Gene, do you have any shout outs you want to make?
Yeah, just to go on your point, this is a completely non-linear show. We're gonna but if you want to aim us in a direction, you can hit our Twitter, which is our Twitter's Unconv Heroes. Our Instagram is Unconventional Heroes with a capital U, capital H. You can also send to our email, which is unconventional.heroes, HEROS, @gmail.com. If you have any subjects or topics of nerdery that we can talk about in our varied and likely wrong opinions. But I would like to make some shout outs, which is 6 days ago, Lock Unruly followed us. Thank you for the
Locke,
follow.
oh boy. You're my boy, Locke.
And then Regular Human Bartender followed us tonight. And so
Cheers.
thank you for that. We appreciate it. And yeah, so all of our 2D art that is built to kind of look like our dungeon was provided, and I will show it on our closing page for all the artists who have contributed. And with hopes, we had some real life things for the past few Fridays where unfortunately Curse of Strahd could not be broadcast. But this Friday should be our comeback. Next Friday,
triumphant return of Voldus Fly.
Yeah, on April 9th, and there will be likely a surprise that I'm not going to reveal because I haven't gotten a chance to ask Julia if it was okay to.
Surprise!
But there will be a fun surprise for all of you. So
that's exciting.
All right. Well, thank you very much for watching, and we are out.
Good night, guys.
Good night.